You didn't get a Mother's Day present yet, did you? Come on. You want the perfect gift for Mother's Day? Aura frames are beautiful Wi-Fi connected digital picture frames that allow you to share and display unlimited photos. It's super easy to upload and share photos via the Aura app. You take a picture, you send it up. You folks live out of town? Why not let them in on what you're doing with your life? You don't call enough. Or what about your kids? They want to see your kids. Or maybe they just want to see you. I mean, in limited circumstances, that can be true.
True.
It's so easy. You take a picture on your phone, you pop it into the Aura app, and the picture shows up on their picture frame. And if you're giving it as a gift to your mom, you can preload pictures on it without ever having to open up the box. Not to mention, one of the great things, I mean, the Aura frames are beautiful. They are considered the best by places like Wirecutter and a bunch of online locations. But the thing that I think is the best is that when you give one of these frames, invariably, a lot of times, the people have no technical ability whatsoever. And you can literally set up, not only preload the pictures, you can set up their Wi-Fi password on it too, without taking it out of the box. It is, like I say, named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter. They are guaranteed to bring joy to moms of all ages. And right now, Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. Listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com/majority to get $30 off plus free shipping on their best-selling frame. That's AURA frames.com, auraframes.com/majority. Use the code majority at checkout to save. Terms and conditions apply. And now it's time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, April 30th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Peter Shamshiri. You may know him as Lawboy on Twitter. He's co-host of If Books Could Kill and the 5-4 podcast on 4 of the most disturbing Supreme Court cases that have recently been orally argued at that venue. Meanwhile, U.S. determines that 5 military units committed human rights violations. I should say Israeli military units committed human rights violations pre-October 7th, but claims they're fixed now. Remember, that other report has to be certified by May 8th. We shall see how that goes. Protesters occupy Columbia's University's Hamilton Hall, and 50 protesters arrested on the campus of UT Austin. New poll, Trump with a slight edge over Biden in 7 key swing states. And speaking of Donald Trump, his criminal trial resumes today. And he's also been held in contempt of his gag order. That's going to cost him a cool $11,000. Federal court in Virginia rules that state health care plans must pay for gender-affirming surgeries. Robert Kennedy Jr. makes the California ballot on the AIP party line. which used to be a segregationist party, now just promotes Christian conservative values and limited government and limited taxes. Although their new platform is in construction, literally. Bureau of Labor Statistics report wage gains slightly outpacing inflation now. Florida abortion ban to go into effect tomorrow. And there's a New York State special election. I should say a special election in New York State for Congress up near Buffalo. It's going to be a Democrat's going to win, but it's going to further diminish the Republican majority in the House, at least temporarily. All this while Mike Johnson seems somewhat safe in his seat today. All this and more on today's Majority Report. It is, ladies and gentlemen,
Newsday Tuesday.
Newsday Tuesday, as pronounced by Emma Vigland. And, of course, Newsday Tuesday simply cannot start unless you had said that. So,
Yes.
thank you.
No problem.
Appreciate that. I got so angry reading these Supreme Court cases. Some of these were argued last week when I wasn't around.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Particularly the presidential immunity one is some of the oral arguments by the conservatives dubious.
Seems a little bit weird.
Seems a little weird for, say, Alito to claim that it would be more destabilizing for the country for the president to fear prosecution after leaving office versus having the president have to abide by laws while in office. I don't know what the framers would think of that, nor do I really care. It's just about how to rationally construct a society.
It's a little bit of a problem.
A stable society. Someone might threaten how stable our society is.
It feels super stable right now. I don't know about you.
Maybe I'll read this this clip. Time Magazine has a big interview out with Donald Trump right now, or I should say, combine a story on Donald Trump for 2 interviews that he had. And a little bit disturbing, some of the things he's got planned.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
But it's good to know that the Supreme Court has his back. We will talk more. I know it. I got a little bit. We're getting around that time where it's going to be harder and harder to ignore the fact that we're heading into an election with the incumbent who seems to be hell-bent on giving Donald Trump every opportunity he can to win this election, not the least of which by emboldening a genocide, ethnic cleansing, whatever you want to call it, a horrific nightmare. 40 now reported killed in an airstrike in Rafah. When it was 13, I had heard a report that initially the initial numbers were 13. At least 9 of them were women and children. The Israeli rules of engagement are just absurd and obscene, and we've known this for some time. One of the things that I've noticed that seems to be happening on a consistent basis is when people refer to the hostage negotiations, even when casually. I mean, I listened to a podcast the other day of someone that I like, and I don't know their positions on this, but just rolling off the tongue, Hamas is refusing to release the hostages, and that's what the blockage is here. And when you hear actual reporting, though, that's never the case. And this video, CNN's Frederica Whitfield speaks with a former hostage negotiator, an Israeli,
who had to post this on his own page. I saw like some grainy footage on Twitter, had to find this because a lot of this like more international CNN coverage where they're getting the perspectives of either people in Gaza or even Israelis is not being widely disseminated by CNN.
And is this international? I don't think this is.
It may not even be.
This looks like regular CNN. But the point is that
Right.
it is fascinating to watch stories that the mainstream media, broadly our society does not want to amplify. There were 40 or 50 journalist professors who wrote to the New York Times to reassess their story that talked about the systemic rape that Hamas was using on October 7th. That's different from saying that there were no rapes taking place there. There clearly were at least some rape taking place in that instance. We also have reports of rape taking place with Israeli soldiers on Palestinian prisoners. But that is different from saying it is systemic. Now, one could argue that if this is happening in prisons and institutions, you could argue that it's systemic. I don't want to litigate that. But we just don't hear these stories that push back on these. And here is CNN's Frederica Whitfield. And again, yes, this is on CNN, but it's not being amplified.
Yes. I meant the internationally focused stuff, not necessarily it being on their international channel, I should say.
And here's Gershon Baskin, who, maybe we'd have on. I don't think I would agree with his politics and a lot of other things, but it's sort of shocking that he's not on at 8 p.m. on every news channel in the country. But here he is.
Former hostage negotiator Gershon Baskin, who is Middle East director of the International Communities Organization. Gershon, great to see you. So I want to begin with, a relative of hostage Keith Siegel, whose video Proof of Life was just released. Hannah Siegel is Keith's niece, and she said it was bittersweet seeing the video and hearing her uncle's voice. Take a listen to what she told CBS Today.
He starts the video by saying how much he loves us, he loves our family, and he's obviously under duress. He's gaunt, he looks weak, but that's real. I know that he misses his family. He talks in the video about hearing bombs all around him. Yeah. And so we worry about the fact that he's being held underground by a terrorist group, of course. We worry about the fact that he's starving. When Aviva came out, she talked to us about how they were beginning to starve. And I can't imagine that hasn't gotten so much worse. You can see it on his face. And we also worry about the bombs going off.
Keith Siegel is one of several American hostages being held. She makes reference to Aviva, that's his wife, who was also a hostage, but she was released back in November. So Hannah, as you hear there, Gershon believes also that the release of this weekend's videos and that of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, seen in a Proof of Life video last week, she believes all of that are signals from Hamas that they are ready to make a deal. Do you agree?
Hamas has been ready to make a deal for quite some time, but their conditions are that the deal include the formal end of the war and his commitment to Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And that's a step too far for the current Israeli government. Netanyahu, who's held hostage by the more right-wing elements within his government, say that if Netanyahu agrees to end the war, in fact, if he agrees not to attack in Rafah, his government will break apart. And Netanyahu is most concerned with the prolongation of his government, which means that he wants to prolong the war. And here's where we're stuck. Because the negotiators have come back to Israel, the Qataris and the Egyptians, over and over again, and said that Hamas is willing to release all the hostages, dead and alive, all 133 of them, but the condition is that this war come to an end. And here's where we're stuck.
And so Hannah, seemed to think...
Pause it for 1 second. This is important because the number of people who have said, whether it's on Twitter or in any sort of venue, that this can end tomorrow if Hamas releases the hostages, clearly are either completely misinformed or are just lying. Because that's the deal that's been on the table for months. Continue.
And so Hannah, seemed to think that that this isn't coming to an end, or at least an agreement seems elusive, at least in part because of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that it's not in his political interest, she believes, to close a deal. Do you share that same view?
I do. I think it's very clear that Netanyahu has missed opportunities that have been there on the table in the past months to make a deal. There was a short period of time when there might have been possible to do what they call a humanitarian deal, a release of the remaining women and children, sick, elderly, and wounded, without the Israeli commitment to end the war. But Israel was too slow to act on that, and Hamas went back and hardened its positions and demanded the end of the war. And here, as I said, Netanyahu does not want to end the war. He believes that there can be the complete victory that no one else agrees with. There's no such thing as a complete victory in these circumstances. The longer that Israel remains in Gaza, the more we will see armed insurgency against Israel, and will encourage the development of Hamas and more radical groups than Hamas. There must be a political alternative put on the table for the day after, and Netanyahu and his government refuse to do that. And the negotiators are stuck. They can't negotiate without having an alternative to Hamas on the table, because an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and ending the war leaves Hamas in place in Gaza.
The U.S. Secretary.
I mean, there is, I don't even know what the negotiations are. If you're not going to negotiate the end of the war in any way, is there anybody in the world that thinks that at one point the world's not going to force some more aid in there? Like, what do the Israelis bring to the table? The bottom line is there's just not a negotiating partner there. They have no, and Biden said this as much. They released, what was it, like almost a month ago, where Biden said, to Netanyahu, you've got to empower your negotiators to actually negotiate something.
So, the whole idea that if hostages were just released, and again, he previously negotiated in 2011 for hostage releases. So he's just speaking from his expertise and history with that. But I mean, Netanyahu apparently this morning, Barak Ravid reported that they'll invade Rafah. That's what he said. Netanyahu with or without a hostage deal. So, I mean, it's just laying bare, I think, how the American government and the negotiators were taken for a ride by the Israelis, who are not ever engaging in these negotiations in good faith, whose primary objective, even if it wasn't the negotiators who Blinken's team were directly engaged with, it starts at the top and with this extremist war cabinet who want this conflict prolonged as long as humanly possible, at least Netanyahu does in particular. And then the other extremists just want as many Palestinians dead as possible, too. And
the idea that Netanyahu is held hostage by his own right-wing government, even if you're to accept that premise, the only answer in that instance is for the American government to say, we're not going to send aid. That's the only way to free Netanyahu in that instance, if you believe that's the dynamic. And it very well may be. But the only way to exercise leverage, if Netanyahu, is going to just keep saying, I'm going to go into Rafah and never actually do it, or whatever it is, the only way that that this resolves itself is if the United States uses its leverage and communicates to the Israeli population, essentially, like, you're going to get isolated.
I saw protests out in Tel Aviv, I believe, somewhere in Israel, people holding up a sign called, Biden, please save us. And at the same time, Biden is basically just enabling and not doing anything. They were anti-Netanyahu protests. And Biden is enabling this far-right maniac. It's a topsy-turvy world that we're in right now.
Speaking of which, we're going to be talking in just a moment to Peter Shamshiri. He is a law boy on Twitter and co-host of If Books Could Kill and the 5-4 podcast on some of the Supreme Court cases that are in front of him right now that we heard some oral arguments to last week and earlier. First, a word from our sponsor. This is a sponsor I used its products years before they became a sponsor on the program. Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the United States. They have 10,000 different kinds of plants, over 2 million happy customers in the US. They have everything you could possibly want when it comes to fruit trees, to shade trees, to evergreens, to palm trees, house plants, tall grass, shrubberies, all of it. Doesn't matter what you're interested in, they have it for you. And the beauty of Fast Growing Trees is that they also offer all sorts of advice. You don't know what's going to work in your yard or in your garden or in your house, depending on where you live or how many times a week you think you can water something, et cetera, et cetera. Fast Growing Trees is available 24/7 for providing you with expert advice. They also have a 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee. They will ship, Fast Growing Trees will you order online, they will ship it to you directly within 1 or 2 days. And then you put it in the ground, you have 30 days to make sure that it takes and it gets rooted, or whether it's in your house or whatnot. Indoors, incidentally, you can grow like a lemon tree, an avocado tree, olive tree, or a fig tree, a whole bunch of stuff that you wouldn't expect. Fast Growing Trees has a big spring sale right now, up to half of on their select plants and other deals. Listeners to our show get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code MAJORITY at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code MAJORITY at checkout, fastgrowingtrees.com. Code is MAJORITY. Offers valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. Skip that box store and get a real, buy from a real nursery. Fastgrowingtrees.com. Also, another great Mother's Day, Father's Day gift that is coming up. This is really, I can't say enough about this. Storyworth. And what it does is it basically is just a mechanism in which to get your parents, and you could do this with your grandparents, your uncles, or whatever, aunts, whatever, to tell you stories about their life that you don't know how to get out of them. They don't know how to do it. It gives a formalized process, but it's super easy. They can be hilarious, heartfelt, it doesn't matter. They're retelling the events of their life, and it helps you preserve these memories, both for your parents and for you and for your kids, for that matter, or your sisters, your brothers, it doesn't matter. Thanks to Storyworth for sponsoring the Majority Report, and Storyworth is offering $10 off your first purchase at storyworth.com/majority. And here's how it works. Each week, Storyworth emails your mom or your dad, maybe it's Mother's Day in this case, a thought-provoking question that you get to help to pick. Or you can just say, I'll just take the one that you guys choose. Storyworth makes the writing process a breeze. All they got to do that you give this gift to is respond to that email with a story. Long or short, it doesn't matter. The prompts are like, what was your favorite car? Or, what was one time that you thought that you were in danger? Or one time that you were, they're very simple questions, but they get you thinking. And then you get emailed a copy of your loved one's response over the course of the year. You get to enjoy their retelling of their stories as it goes. And after that year, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you're going to be able to share and revisit for generations to come. You can give them one, you can give yourself one, give your kids one, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great way, and do it now, because you folks are getting older, grandparents, folks aren't going to be around for a long time, and it's really a great way to get them to tell stories that it's awkward sometimes to say, like, tell me a story. Right, and it's work. But families really love a Storyworth. Give all the moms in your life a unique, heartfelt gift you're going to cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/majority. That's storyworth.com/majority. Save $10 on your first purchase. Quick break, and we'll be right back with Peter Shamshari. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. A real pleasure to welcome back to the program Peter Shamshiri. You may know him as Law Boy on Twitter. He's the co-host of If Books Could Kill and the 5-4 podcast. Peter, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here.
All right, let's this is, to talk about all four of these cases in one go is actually really depressing. And I can only imagine why you've got to have two podcasts, because if it was just the Supreme Court one, I think it would be just too depressing.
It wears at you for sure.
We're in that era, I guess, where it's going to be like this for a while. But let's start first with Grants Pass v. Johnston. This is a question as to whether laws, broadly speaking, prohibiting camping on public property constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, which of course is a prohibition under the Eighth Amendment. Mm-hmm. And so walk us through this case. It's an interesting case. It's also sort of weird in the way that the plaintiff brought it seems to me, but walk us through this.
Yeah, I mean, the big picture is that a lot of West Coast cities, Grants Pass, Oregon is the one in question, but this includes San Francisco, just don't have enough shelter beds for their unhoused population, which forces people onto the street, generally into homeless encampments or just camping on their own. And the municipalities have laws that basically say you can't camp. It's a criminal offense to camp outside, and they define it in different ways. And that leads to police coming in and clearing them out by force. And a few years ago, the Ninth Circuit, in a case called Martin v. Boise, basically held that you can't do that unless you have adequate shelter beds, right? Because there's nowhere for these people to go. It's just unnecessarily cruel. You're just saying you have to leave, you have to pick up your stuff and go, but there's nowhere to actually go. The city is not providing them with anywhere to go. So that's cruel and unusual punishment. So this is basically that case risen to the Supreme Court. They turned it down in 2019, but we are now post RBG and things have changed up there. So basically, the advocates for homeless people, for unhoused people, have been pushing this claim that this is all a violation of the Eighth Amendment, that this is cruel and unusual punishment. And I think the core of the argument is this idea that this discriminates based on status rather than conduct. There's this case in the 60s, Robinson v. California, that basically said you can criminalize drug use, but you can't criminalize being a drug addict. You can't criminalize addiction, right? You're criminalizing someone's status. And so we had a whole oral argument about just the most inane, hair-splitting distinctions about, like, well, are we outlawing homelessness or are we outlawing sleeping outside? And what's the difference there? Clarence Thomas believes that there's a real difference. So this oral argument was torture to listen to. It was a real good lens into what being a lawyer is like, where you have to hear these just obviously terrible arguments. But that's the fundamental argument there.
And wasn't the plaintiffs also arguing that the prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment is in the actual punishment rather than the implications? In other words, like almost like the difference between a verb, like when one's an active verb and one's an inactive verb. Like the punishment of you get a fine for camping is not as an isolated way necessarily cruel and unusual, except for the fact if you know that the people don't have any other place to be, that it's actually like that was the weird part that it struck me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the heart of the advocate's argument, that this actually it's cruel because there are no shelter beds being provided, right? If you had a situation where these cities were providing adequate resources to unhoused people, then you could argue that it's not cruel to not let them camp outside because we have this perfectly reasonable, safe place for you to go. But if they're not providing that, then it's necessarily cruel, that all you're doing is taking these sort of necessities that they have, confiscating them or dismantling them. I mean, it was compared by the liberal justices in oral argument to any other necessity, right? Can people eat outside? Can people go to the bathroom outside if there's no public toilets available to them and they have nowhere else to go? I think the argument's sort of intuitive. It's just cruel by its nature, right? These are people who need to sleep outside because they have nowhere else to sleep.
And to Sam's point, I think, Sotomayor made that argument, right? Which was that I fall asleep on the beach, and how is that a different kind of category? I'm not going to get arrested when I fall asleep on the beach, but somebody who falls asleep in a public park is going to do so. And so how does that not constitute criminalizing homelessness as a status? And they didn't really have a great argument for that. They just kind of skirted the question.
Yeah, I mean, Sotomayor was pointing out that even if you think this isn't criminalizing homelessness, what the state was saying, what the city was saying was, well, we're not criminalizing homelessness, we're just criminalizing sleeping outside, right? And so Sotomayor was sort of saying, well, are you really getting anyone else on this, right? Or if someone who's in business casual falls asleep on a bench, have they ever been ticketed for that? The answer is pretty much just no. The city has like one example of someone who technically had an address, and I don't know if that meant that they actually had access to that home, but it's very obvious that even if you sort of want to do this hair splitting between, what's the difference between someone who sleeps outside and someone who is homeless, that it's just only being enforced against people who the police think look like they don't have a home.
Yeah.
What's your sense of how they dispose of this case?
Well, the conservatives hate the Eighth Amendment. This is a long-standing thing. 25 years ago, we had Antonin Scalia saying it's not cruel and unusual for an innocent person to be executed. I mean, this is like part of the conservative jurisprudential tradition to just never really expand the Eighth Amendment. So I would be shocked if they bit on any Eighth Amendment argument. There is sort of a third way that Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett were pushing, which is basically, well, instead of making this an Eighth Amendment thing per se, can't we say that this is what's like in the law a necessity defense? This is something that like comes up in criminal law where basically if you have a real human need to commit a crime, that can be a defense for that crime. So, stealing a loaf of bread when you're starving is, of course, the classic example. But like here, what they're saying is, well, couldn't these just be raised as defenses after the fact? I wouldn't be surprised if that's where the conservatives go with this one. But really a non-starter, I think, from the advocate's perspective. I mean, the bottom line is this means that police would have the right to clear homeless people out from where they're sleeping. And then, like, in court, the people can raise the defense of necessity. So, I mean, in my mind, it's just sort of a distraction, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's where the conservatives go with it.
And so we are basically making it, I mean, in that event, just to be clear, it is essentially illegal to be homeless, but there are mitigating circumstances where you may not have to serve time, essentially, is what it comes down to.
Right. And I mean, to be clear, most of these situations don't involve anyone serving time. I mean, if you look at the Grants Pass examples, it's not quite as visceral. But if you look at what's happening in San Francisco, which is where the heart of this political battle is, where you have the mayor complaining about these laws, these cases, you basically have situations where the police are just coming in and clearing out encampments, right? They confiscate tents, they tell people they have to leave, and that's it. No one's really getting arrested in these cases. The police are just utilizing the authority of the law. So the necessity defense really does nothing for someone who's just trying to stay somewhere during the night.
Right. These laws just end up being, I guess, a vehicle to immiserate people more than they're than they are at that time. God, it would be horrible if it forced actually cities to provide housing for that. That would be what a novel way to approach that problem.
That's what's so frustrating about this case is that we have like Gavin Newsom and his political allies complaining about these sorts of cases. All they have to do to make this go away is provide adequate shelter for their unhoused population. That's not something they're willing to do or able to do for whatever political constraints they claim. But that's the sort of obvious everyone wins solution. And I mean, I wouldn't even say everyone wins because you have problems with the shelter system, but that's a solution available to them that they're just not ready to utilize.
Let's move on to Moyle v. U.S. This is a question as to whether the Supreme Court should essentially intervene in the order from a U.S. District Court for Idaho, which stopped, enjoins the enforcement of Idaho's Defense of Life Act on the grounds that because almost everywhere in Idaho, all of the medical facilities receive, I think, federal funding through either Medicaid or Medicare. There is a federal provision called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which basically says if somebody is in danger, you have to provide the appropriate medical response, which in some instances is abortion, despite the fact that Idaho has this abortion ban. And this was an attempt by the Biden administration to sort of like impose a federal almost safety net for access to abortion across the country. And so it's being tested here in Idaho. What went on?
So what the Biden administration is claiming is that the Idaho law conflicts with the federal law, and therefore is what we call preempted. That federal law is sovereign, and so the Idaho lawyers are in a weird sort of place where we have this federal law that says you need to provide emergency treatment, and that sort of obviously includes abortion in many cases. You have this Idaho law that says, well, you can only provide abortions in the case of a threat to the life of the mother. And what Idaho has argued is that these are the same thing, which sort of just hand waves away all of the various situations where you might need an abortion for medical reasons that fall short of threatening your actual life. Sotomayor just like peppered the Idaho attorney with all of these examples of real scenarios where pregnant people were experiencing an emergency that wasn't necessarily life-threatening but still required an abortion. There was one where a woman who had PPROM premature rupture of the amniotic sac. And I apologize to anyone when I try to discuss women's health. And if I humiliate myself, it's not my fault. It's society's. So, like, without an abortion, this can lead to, the need for a hysterectomy. But the mother's life is not at risk, and at least not in like the short to medium term. And so the attorney, and so Sotomayor is saying, well, this is obviously a conflict between these laws, and the Idaho law is obviously preempted in that case. And the attorney just sort of hemmed and hawed to the point where Justice Alito had to bail him out, basically, with a certain theory that's been floating around right-wing circles on this, which is that EMTALA, the federal law, it uses the term unborn child at one point, or a couple points, I should say. But basically, emergencies under this law include threats to the life of an unborn child. This was an amendment to the law, got added in, I think, 89. The original law was passed in 86 because people were showing up to emergency rooms, and the emergency was to the fetus. And so this law was saying, okay, well, in that case, you have to provide care in that case too. That is also covered by the law. But Alito was making this claim that the term unborn child is just sort of like a pro-lifey kind of term. And doesn't that mean that the life of the unborn child is protected by the federal statute, and therefore the federal law actually doesn't require abortions at all? Which is, I mean, it really is just a vibes-based argument. Like, doesn't this kind of feel like pro-life? Doesn't this kind of feel pro-life to you? Yeah. I mean, there's nothing in the law that would forbid an abortion. Certainly doesn't expressly say so. There's nothing that says that you couldn't harm a fetus at any stage as part of emergency treatment for a pregnant person. So he's just sort of going for it, making it up and saying, at one point he said, like, I don't think, I feel like the Reagan administration wouldn't have wanted to do this.
It's also just sort of bizarre in the sense that, like, well, wait a second. What if the woman's or the pregnant person's life is in danger and you need to provide an abortion? Right. If what he's saying is the case, then it would actually even go further than the Idaho ban.
Yeah, that's right. At least that's like a fairly natural inference you could make from what he's saying.
He's doing a lot of inferring too. I mean,
he loves an inference, Alito, I try not to parse his logic too much because his brain is truly melting before our eyes. Yes. And if you listen to oral arguments, it becomes clear that this is just a man who, watches Fox News at night, and maybe not Fox News. Maybe he's on that Newsmax tip. I don't know exactly what's going on with him, but he's melting down. It's been a rough few years for his brain. And I think if you try to dig into it too much, you will drive yourself a little bit nuts. So I try to take a step back and just say, I don't get it. I think he's just sort of a dick. And
well, I'm going to respect your mental health and not make you go any further with that one. So what's your sense of, Alito aside, did you get a sense of, where everyone else was on this?
It's really hard to say in this case. I think that if you look at like Amy Coney Barrett, a lot of people were saying, actually, she sounded pretty skeptical of Idaho, but she's done that before. I think she's quite, she likes to sort of bounce back and forth in oral arguments and then end up doing this sort of like generic conservative thing.
And she also has, I would imagine, particularly on questions about abortion. I mean, people may remember that she signed this this anti-abortion ad in the New York Times a couple of years before she became a justice. So I would imagine that there is like, if she has any sort of like sense of her image and her legacy and whatnot, which I'm quite convinced they all do in a big way. I would imagine her public statements about this need to be skeptical as a way of like sort of showing that she's really weighing these things as opposed to the reality when she had decided them 15 years ago, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so hard in a lot of these cases. I mean, the potential headlines here are pretty rough for the conservatives, especially in an election year. That hasn't stopped them before, but the idea that they might come to a conclusion where the most extreme situations are that the life of the mother isn't protected in these situations. I think those sorts of scenarios probably weigh in their minds. So hard to say. The Idaho attorney was the position's really difficult to defend, but the court has a ton of options in terms of middle grounds. They're probably not going to bite on that Alito unborn child thing, but they can sort of define the Idaho law and the federal law however they choose, and then try to reconcile them in some way. That's my best guess, is that they try to forge a middle ground there. But I also think that the sort of fundamental idea that these laws conflict would be pretty hard for them to avoid. I don't want to give them credit, but I don't know how they come out saying that the laws don't conflict and that the federal law isn't the dominant law in these situations. But I've been wrong before. John Roberts is a creative dude.
Right.
Well, the border, right? That we thought that it might be a slam dunk for them to do something a little bit reasonable and say, oh, of course the federal government has authority over the border, and they declined to do so. But look, that's a whole
I can't tell you how
tangent.
many times that legal nerds like me have seen a case and been like, no way.
Yeah.
No way that the Supreme Court is going to entertain this, and then we all get humbled and embarrassed because, of course, they do. Yeah.
I remember how people were saying there's no way the Supreme Court's going to take this case from Florida about the election. That's just no way they're ever going to do that in 2000. That was that to me, I think, was one of the most, as far as for as long as I've been paying attention to this stuff, that seems to be the one which the institution, the legal institution, law as an institution in this country was most shocked. And then 9/11 happened, and it was all people forgot about it. Let's talk about Starbucks versus McKinney. It's interesting because Starbucks is now sitting down and negotiating with its union, but the National Labor Relations Board had found that they had engaged in unfair labor practices, specifically in the firing of some employees who were organizing. And the question here is whether courts must evaluate the National Labor Relations Board's requests for injunctions. And I guess the injunctions have to do with stuff like firing and whatnot, right? Whether the courts have to impose a 4-factor test or some other more lenient standard. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so when the NLRB senses an unfair labor act, they will file for an injunction to basically maintain the status quo at those businesses while they sort out whether or not there was, in fact, in their opinion, an unfair labor action. So if someone was fired and they think that that was a violation of the National Labor Relations Act, that person would be reinstated while they sort it out. And the idea is that if you don't do that, if you just allow someone to be fired, for example, then by the time everything is resolved months and months later, the damage has been done to the organizing effort, right? That's where the NLRB gets their authority here. So what this
ironically,
is about,
that's what the right wing on the Supreme Court argued would happen if they enjoined the Florida recount, that there would be a presumption that George Bush is not president in some fashion. But go ahead.
Right. This is about what standard is used in those injunctions. Basically, right now, there's a very low standard that a court will, at least in some circuit, there's a circuit split about this, but in some circuits, in some federal circuits, there is a standard where if the NLRB comes to them and says, we want an injunction, they will grant that injunction unless they think it's frivolous. That is a much lower standard than your standard injunction, where you basically have to prove what's called a likelihood of success on the merits, basically meaning you're more than 50% to win this case in the eyes of the court, which means that when most people go for an injunction in court, you're sort of litigating the whole thing right off the bat. You're saying, we're going to win this, right? And the court's saying either yes or no. And that sort of dictates where you are. So the NLRB has operated with this lower standard, at least in some circuits, for a good amount of time. And Starbucks sort of thought, hey, why don't we say that this is unfair? And I think the court's going to buy it, because it seemed like Starbucks had the liberals on their side to some degree, at least with the idea that the standard needed to be raised. Not KBJ, but I mean, there's only 3 of them, so all 3 isn't enough, let alone just 1. But you're right. I mean, Sotomayor and Kagan were just a little more skeptical, I think, of the NLRB position than they would be if they were ready to just go all out and draw a line in the sand on it. And I think that this is the type of case that the conservatives love. Hard to explain to the average person, right? It's hard for the New York Times to get a punchy headline about this. It's about injunction standards at the end of the day. And it undermines the authority of the NLRB, which they truly love to do.
Yeah. How much of this is like part of the whole Chevron doctrine assault and the non-delegation assault? I mean, I guess I wasn't necessarily aware that the NLRB had to get a court to sign off on these things each time they imposed a penalty or a constraint in these situations, because this is going to become increasingly relevant, both in the sense of like in the wake of the Cemex case, where unionization is basically imposed if there has been, the National Labor Relations Board finds that there's been unfair labor practices in the context of an anti-unionization effort. And then there's a lot of people who hope that the National Labor Relations Board is going to say, we're going to arbitrate a contract if, you haven't gone into contract within, 6 months, a year after unionization. That's on its face an unfair labor practice. Therefore, we can impose a contract on both parties. All of that seems like, this feels like a string that's being pulled to go after those big prizes.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do view this as sort of part of the non-delegation project. The NLRB gets all of their power from the National Labor Relations Act, which is in some ways you could characterize it as a vague statute. I think I would characterize it as a broad statute rather than vague, but I think conservatives have long thought this is all a little too vague. And the whole purpose of the sort of non-delegation doctrine is to clamp down on that sort of vagueness and basically just read everything as narrowly as possible. So if you're not getting express authority for something from the NLRA, then you can't do it. That has been like part of the conservative project, Read the Administrative State, for a very, very long time. And I think they see the NLRB as something they can sort of pick apart steadily. You've had these relatively fringe theories come up that the whole project is sort of unconstitutional, that the composition of the NLRB is sort of functionally unconstitutional. I don't think those are particularly serious, but I do think that the conservatives are very willing to look at any given part of the NLRA and just read it narrowly. And if you do that enough times, the NLRA becomes very, very weak.
All right. Well, I guess we'll find this is another one we're going to have to wait until, I guess, June or maybe early July. Lastly, this one, which seems to have disturbed some people last week. It turns out that there is some conservatives on the Supreme Court, at least, maybe more than just some, feel like we've been a little bit too dainty when it comes to holding presidents accountable in terms of the law. This is, of course, the immunity question, Trump v. United States. How did this question get in front of the Supreme Court, and what is it? Why is Trump bringing this up? It's in the context of the Jack Smith investigation.
Yeah, so Jack Smith bringing federal criminal charges against Trump. And in December, I think it was mid-December, Trump basically raises this argument that he is immune. It's absolute immunity as president. And so this was sort of brought to the Supreme Court. In December, I think it was in December, Jack Smith went to the court and said, hey, we have this district court decision saying he's not immune. Let's skip the Court of Appeals and go straight to the Supreme Court because we all know where this is headed, which is something that the court can do. And they said, no thanks. We're going to let this go through the Court of Appeals.
What's the hurry?
No, why
would be the hurry? It's not like the guy's running for president or something. I'm teasing around this, but the Supreme Court's whole strategy here is about delay. Delay this to the point where the trial is either happening during the election or hasn't even started, I think is quite a possibility now. So they wait until early January to take the case. They could have put it on an expedited schedule, which is very common for things like this. They didn't do that. Instead, we get oral argument last week. And now, just to give a sense of timeline, that's just amazing to me. It's just amazing.
Like, as soon as they did that, as soon as they told the Court of Appeal, they said, well, the Court of Appeals can hear it first and then it'll get to us. It felt like it was very obvious what was going to happen and what the next 6 months would look like to me.
It's amazing. Sorry. So continue. So that's how it gets there. And this is really a question, like, what is the central sort of like nub of the question? It's not assessing whether something is an official act or it's not an official act, or is it that you can take an official act that breaks the law and it's okay?
Well, there's no rule, right? So the only case really about
there sort of is a rule. You're not supposed to break the law.
Well, there are criminal laws, Sam, but the question is, to what extent do they apply to presidents? There has only ever been one case about presidential liability, really, Nixon v. Fitzgerald in the early 80s, which was about Nixon firing someone at an administrative agency. So not really in this, we're talking about civil liability there. It's not criminal liability. And what the court said was, well, the president is not going to be civilly liable for any official acts of his presidency, which they didn't define. So we don't actually know what that means. That said, they also weren't talking about criminal liability. So when it comes to criminal liability, we have that case that sort of guides us a bit, but we don't really know what the rule is.
Don't we largely have a broad principle and maybe even statutory language that says for an official act, no civil servant or like city or state or federal official can be held civilly liable, broadly speaking, right? Doesn't that already exist?
More or less. There are various immunity doctrines, some of them statutory, some of them common law. But this like very specific question of presidential criminal immunity is very novel. I don't want to give it too much credit. When I say something is novel, what I mean is that there's absolutely no law out there that says that Donald Trump is immune. The only question here is whether the Supreme Court's about to make one up. Right.
What's the okay. I don't mean to put you as if you're arguing against that, but let me put it this way. Does a former president have any more basis in which to make this claim than like, I'm a podcast host. Of course I'm immune from criminal liability if I did it during the course of my podcast. Why is there even like a question as to you don't have criminal liability if you've had this job or another job? Like,
Well,
like,
because no one would be coming. Alito's argument was no one would be coming after you as a podcast host because there's so many
you kidding?
politicized prosecutions.
Are you kidding?
I
Are
know.
you kidding?
I know.
That
I
goes
know.
to show that he doesn't know anything about podcasts.
He doesn't know
Yes.
anything about
Dangerous jobs
podcasts
out
or
there.
particularly YouTube. I mean, like
Alito knows nothing about
no,
podcasting. Okay,
but honestly, like, why is there even a presumption that this should even be entertained? Like,
Well, I mean, because Sam Alito watches Fox News. I really think. I mean, I don't think that there were a ton of serious scholars who. This is another case like the Bush v. Gore, where the idea only gets made serious by like the conservative legal types sort of making it serious. You know, they write a bunch of op-eds like, you know, maybe presidential criminal immunity makes some sense, and then we end up having to entertain that. I mean, the fundamental argument, and Clarence Thomas made this during oral argument a few times, is basically, well, this is a hard job that operates in a lot of gray areas legally, sort of necessarily. And so if we start allowing for presidents to be held criminally liable, then it's a slippery slope, right? He mentioned Operation Mongoose, the potential coup, the attempted coup in Cuba in the early 60s, and was like, well, you know, they could have held Kennedy liable for that. Now, I think my response to that is like, well, yeah, they could have. It's also a weird example because Kennedy was killed pretty shortly after, so I would have used one of the other coups that we did. But I think that's what the conservatives are getting at, right? That it's a tough job, you know. You got to do a lot of crazy stuff that operates in legal gray areas, and we need to like build room for presidents to do that.
well, first off, like even that premise seems dubious to me because you could say Iran Contra, but I mean the fact is that there should have been criminal proceedings against that. I mean the idea that there are stuff, you know, Barack Obama found legal authority to assassinate U.S. citizens abroad, at the very least, right? He did this with Anwar al-Awlaki. Now, I don't even think that we had that, that he had that authority, frankly, and I think it was really dangerous. But there was a procedure, at the very least, that was built up and around. It could theoretically be tested. I think, in fact, al-Awlaki's parents may have actually tested that in court in some fashion. I can't remember, but at least there's a procedure associated with that that is built up as if to bring it in. And I would say, not to Obama's credit, he tried to take stuff that the Bush administration had done and put it into a legal framework. Right. Because he was that type of guy. This stuff needs to be done, and there's a legal framework. But at least when the legal framework is there, society can make this assessment and can reject the underlying legality of it. That's not what's going on here. This is like, if you find out that they did something that was illegal, he just walks anyway. There's no point in even bringing it up.
Right. I mean, Trump, to be clear, is arguing for a maximalist, you know, anything presidents do is legal sort of argument. I don't think the court's going to buy that, but I do think
society laughed at that when Nixon claimed it.
Right.
Right. I mean, like we laughed at it when the president does it. It can't be illegal. Everybody laughed at that.
Right. I mean, this case is another this case just gets me. It's obviously ridiculous. The idea that this is like a slippery slope, right? The Trump's lawyer started off by saying that, like, if we go down this road, what if Biden is prosecuted for his border policies? And I mean, I don't know what law he's supposed to have violated, but like the idea that this is a slippery
what criminal
slope,
law too, for that matter.
The idea that this is a slippery slope, I don't get it. This is the first time it's ever happened, right? It's been 200 something years since the beginning of the Republic. I feel like if this were really, a precarious situation we've put presidents in, then perhaps it wouldn't be the first time that this is ever happening. I mean, the bottom line for me is I don't think the court is going to bite on like these really maximalist Trump can do whatever he wants sort of interpretations. I think they're going to come up with a broad definition of what an official act is, say that he's immune whenever he does an official act, and then leave it to the lower court to hash out what exactly Trump
the
did and
facts
which of
are in
those
that situation.
Right, which would, by the way, potentially allow for another appeal on that issue,
Yes.
at which point we're in like next year before
Well, they're
there's even
already
a trial.
delivering for him, right? I mean, they delivered for him already by agreeing to take this case up when they could have just dismissed it, and this further delays Jack Smith's ability to prosecute it, and then saying, we're going to send it back to the lower courts. They can determine if his actions as it relates to January 6th constitute an official act or the other definition of personal act, right? Which seems insane, because what is more official than the transfer of power in a supposed democracy or republic or whatever? And then they're going to take even more time to make that determination if it even falls under that notion, which it clearly does. But that's basically all Trump wants, is after November.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And then they'll find that the president, obviously, if Trump loses the election, they're going to find that, oh yeah, no, he's criminally liable because
Right.
God forbid we have Biden, try and maintain power or something like that.
Right. I mean, the hypotheticals being floated in these cases, the Trump's lawyer in the Court of Appeals was asked basically, well, what if a president assassinates their political rival, right? They say, well, he's a threat to the security of the state or whatever. They come up with some official sounding reason and assassinates their political rival. Is that an official act? Is that legal? And the lawyer was like, well, yeah, maybe, maybe he's immune for that. And so Sotomayor was like, do you want to maybe clarify that? Are you going to stand on that answer? And the lawyer was like, no, yeah, that might be allowed. That might be immune. That could be perfectly fine under the argument that we're putting forward. So the argument is, I mean, unhinged, just completely, is he a king? Is he a dictator? Sort of thing. So I don't actually think they want to reach this question at all. I think they want to delay it until they can sort of like assess the landscape and figure out what the best move for the Republican Party is.
It's so creepy how naked all this is, and also how underreported it is as a broad concept in our news media. I mean, you must feel this. This must be like a constant source of frustration. I don't know how you turn on your TV or your radio at any time, but this is like, we're just watching the Supreme Court now, and it's almost been normalized in the same way that like what, Donald Trump as president was. The Supreme Court is just like completely, it seems to have abandoned all of that. And even the lawyers I know who have been sort of like broad institutionalists sort of have buried their head in the sand about this stuff.
Lawyers are easily fooled. If you put some legalese in a document, they will accept anything as a serious argument. I feel like, you said the first time you sort of learned this lesson was Bush v. Gore. I think for me it was the Obamacare case, where every lawyer I knew was laughing at that argument. And then all of a sudden it seems like it might win. And eventually the Commerce Clause argument did win for the conservatives.
I was out in front of the Supreme Court. They had set up a thing like a radio row. I interviewed maybe a dozen law professors. And like there was one person who said, well, it's sort of a sleeper. I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but they may say that like you can't expand Medicare. Like, cause there was like 3 or 4 other questions that were being addressed.
Right.
And nobody would bring that up because they would just be like, no, there's no way. And the idea that you cannot expand Medicaid, even though it's a federal program, like if they had gone back, I don't want to get back into this, but yes, I remember that. That was also where every single one of these law professors I interviewed were all like, nah, there's no way. There's no way.
Well, I think there's a difference in generations, though. I will say, like we've talked about this before, but there's this the older generation of lawyers kind of, I think, sees the Supreme Court still as these priests, and younger people see them as political actors, and like perhaps younger law students too.
Well, Peter, that's my question is like, how is it like for anybody that is in law, like it feels like studying law and then graduating into this world is like studying natural physics and then graduating into Harry Potter world. Like, what is the relevance?
Yeah, I mean, on an ongoing dilemma for like constitutional law professors, how do you teach this when the Supreme Court is just going to make up something new? I will say that I was in law school when I heard Scalia in the Obamacare argument say, like, well, can the government make you eat broccoli? And that was like, there was like a tick in my brain where I got one step closer to being red pilled on the court, where I was sort of like, well, this doesn't seem like what I thought the law was, right? This seems more like a debate on Fox News. And I think that you have to, the professors are sort of trailing the students on this a little bit, but they are, you're seeing some catch up. It's slow. They'll, maybe we have to wait for them to just sort of like slowly leave the academy over the course of a couple decades. But there are a bunch of professors who have written about, like, I think I have to sort of reconceptualize how I teach the law because of what the court's doing.
Where it's basically just like one of those big wheels and you spin it and that type of thing.
Right.
Peter Shamshiri, we will link to your Law Boy handle on Twitter. Or X or whatever we're calling it, co-host of Books Could Kill and If Books Could Kill in the 5-4 podcast. We will link to both those as well. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you both. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much.
All right, folks. We'll head into the fun half of the program. We will take your phone calls. 646-257-3920 is the phone number. Just remember, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a sustaining member of this program by going to jointhemajority.report.com. And when you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you get the fun half, occasionally other benefits. You can IM the show. The app is free for everybody at majorityapp.com, but you can IM the show if you're a member. And you also walk around with the knowledge that you have allowed this show to survive and thrive.
Yeah, presumably that's the cleanest way to get us money, right? Without Bezos or Google taking a cut.
That's right. If you go to jointhemajority.report.com, we have minimized the fees from all of that. We don't have to give a third to Apple or whatever it is. That's the easiest way. Jointhemajority.report.com. Also, we got 20th anniversary merch is in there. We'll come out with some more as it goes along. You can't quite see this logo here on the mug because of the lighting, but you can see it there on the page. It's a beautiful mug. A lot of people, we sold out the first one. I think we got new ones in. So check it out. That is the original logo from 20 years ago when we launched the show.
It's like the throwback Mitchell and Ness.
Oh yeah, it is. It is.
I think
that.
I actually made that myself, or maybe my sister. One of us made it. I think I just made
Photoshop?
it. It wasn't even Photoshop. It was like clip art at the time. You can check that out. Also, and I'll talk more about this in the coming days and weeks. But and I don't even know what the landing page is. But I'll give you more information on this in terms of I'm going to be going on a trip and you're all invited.
Whoa.
But I mean, not you guys.
Oh, God.
Somebody's going to do the show. But
looked me in the eyes as you told me I'm going on a trip.
Yeah, I'm going on a trip and everybody except for everybody in this room is invited. Sorry about that to everybody here, but I will let you know about that.
Oh, cool.
Soon.
Thanks.
Well, we're going to be working, so what do we care?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I may be able to call in and send photos.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Oh, well, photos. It's like we're there.
Bring us back a little
Well, I just
souvenir.
realized I don't have the what do you call it? The landing page. So I don't have the specific landing page, so they don't know if it's me, but we'll get on that. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, fair trade coffee, and hot chocolate. Check it out, folks. The Majority Report blend. Show the Just Coffee page. Pop that up. This is folks, this is a great outfit. They're a co-op. They have all sorts of coffee and very reasonable for high-end coffee. Sustainably grown, community-based, organic coffee. Hit the shop button up there. You can see some of the coffee types up there. I would do medium roasts. Yeah. Oh, what's that? Where's the slide down a little bit?
Are we in the dark roast?
Fuel. There you go. No, we're medium roast. That's what people don't realize. Dark roast, not as caffeinated.
I know you've said that, and now it's in my head. But I like the dark roast taste better. Is that okay?
It's like how Guinness isn't that strong.
Well, this Majority Report blend is great, and you can get a 5-pound bag, and you can also have them grind it to where, if you have a French press, you want it coarse. If you have a drip, you want it fine. So non-GMO, bee certified, all of it. So check it out, justcoffee.coop. Emma!
On ESPN yesterday, Bradley and I went through the NFL draft and all of the insanity that came from it, specifically starting at pick 8 with the Atlanta Falcons. And then we also just had a conversation about all of the series thus far in the NBA and NHL playoffs. The 2 sweeps in, one sweep in the NBA, one in the NHL. Matt's in my team, actually. So, pray for us that our hopes aren't too high right now. YouTube.com/ESPN show.
Matt.
Bradley, do you want to plug your...
Bradley, do you want to talk about what Matt is doing on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning tonight, Danny Bessner on talk about his piece in Harper's about Hollywood, which is massively talked about. Really controversial piece, but we talk about sort of the economics of Hollywood. Also, I just want to shout out WKCR, Columbia Student Radio. I was up till about 3 a.m. last night listening to their coverage of the protests, and I'm so impressed. I'm obviously impressed by the protesters, but the way those students covered that and the poise, and also as a media nerd to see radio used in that way, where you have a whole bunch of different correspondents at different parts of the city reporting on police movements and what it was really astounding. WKCR, it's the Columbia Student Radio. So whenever this stuff happens, check out their stream online, because I'm so impressed. It's the most impressive thing I've seen in media in years since I've graduated as a media studies student.
Is it associated with the Spectator?
It's the official college.
It's the college station. Okay.
Yeah, so it's officially so they have to do they'll read out the full, press releases from the protesters, and then say we're not affiliated, we don't endorse that, but the coverage has just been it was just insanely good and impressive to have different kids on different corners talking about the size of the protests, what the cops are doing, what's on the scanners, just really great stuff. WKCR.
The Columbia Spectator too. I haven't heard what Matt's saying, but it's just really cool. The student newspapers they're doing, and student media organizations are doing a great job in general.
We'll talk about this piece from Judd Legum in a second. Should we do that now, or should we do it
Let's do it in the fun half. We'll do it in the fun half. Yeah.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
and the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Yeah. Hello.
We are back. Oh, we're getting ready to talk about Jerry Seinfeld.
Gearing up. We got some thoughts. Freaking, did you see his wife? All right, well, his wife
Don't get so woke just because he was in his late 30s and was dating a 17-year-old. I don't want to
picking
hear
her up
that.
from math class. Yeah, well, his new wife just donated the most amount of money to the pro-Israel protesters at UCLA who were saying the N-word. So, he's just having a great few months.
I love when Emma is prefacing her comments with frickin'.
Frickin'. Oh, I'm gosh darn mad right now. Don't you get me all riled up.
Two things I wanted to just touch on before we get into some of these clips. One is, it mentioned earlier about this sort of like myth that won't die, that if Hamas was to give back the hostages, this war would be over. They've been offering that for months.
In exchange for the war to be over.
Exactly. And that myth won't die. The other one is, and we hear this all the time too, the immigrant crime spree that is going on. And Judd Legum has a great piece that he's written with Tesnim Zakaria over at, what is his Popular Info.
Great Substack.
And there is not a lot of data around migrant crime because they don't necessarily, nobody centralizes that. But there's an analyst, Jeff Asher, writes in his newsletter, Jeff Analytics, I guess. He looked at trends for violent crime across the 14 counties along the Texas border with Mexico. And if there was a violent crime wave fueled by migrants, it would show up in these counties before anywhere else. Asher found, quote, no evidence of increasing violent crime along the U.S. border with Mexico. In fact, these border counties have seen a relatively steady violent crime rate below that of the rest of their state and the nation as a whole. Now, same trend holds when you look at murder alone, not just violent crime. Murder rate in border counties is consistently lower than the country as a whole, with little change over the last 4 years. So there is no bloodbath at the border. Now, we should also say that part of this probably tracks the broader trends in our society. He makes note of the FBI's quarterly uniform crime report released in March. Homicides were down 13% in 2023 compared to 2022. Meanwhile, violent crime and property crime dipped 6% and 4% respectively. This is preliminary. It is based on reports submitted by only 15,000 of the 19,000 law enforcement agencies around the country, which reflects about 82% of the population. Asher, this analyst, said the decline in murder in 2023 is the largest one-year decline ever recorded.
Because it was a part of a larger trend of declines, as we have said. It's just that there was a small uptick, a significant uptick, but now a return to the overall trend because of the pandemic.
But what we need to
or the George Floyd effect. I'm sorry, the George Floyd effect.
Yeah, exactly.
So the mania because
straight.
Black people called for their rights to be respected. Right, gotcha.
The last time that happened
cops.
was in 96 when murder dropped 9.1% in 163 of 232 cities that submitted data. Murder was down or even, Asher wrote. Now, the preliminary data also suggests that 2023 had the lowest reported violent crime rate nationally since the late 1960s. So in terms of murder, we went up during the once-in-a-lifetime, let's hope, pandemic. And then we started to drop after people started to return to normalcy. Now, if we spike back up, well, then maybe it wasn't a function of the pandemic. Maybe there's something else that's going on. But if the trend keeps going down, like all sorts of different other trends that were that are a function of being in a post-pandemic, right? But we're going to have to wait and see. But in this instance, preliminary data suggests that 2023 had the lowest reported violent crime rate nationally since the late 1960s. In other words, that's not just a dip from some big blip. And let's be clear, that big blip still significantly lower than it was just 25 years ago. And certainly 30, 35 years ago. But this is not coming down from a blip. This is coming down over the course of the last 60 years in terms of violent crime. Asher said early data from 2024, now it's very early in the year, so
Yes.
you take this with a grain of salt. And even the 2023 stuff is still preliminary. That murder is down 20% in 2024 in more than 180 cities compared to the same time period last year, which was 2023. So in other words, there's a trend.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen with it, but there's a trend down because we had a once in a lifetime pandemic. Now, let me be clear. Crime may be up in your city. You may not be one of these 180 cities in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Crime may be up in your neighborhood. But that's not what's happening nationally.
It's kind of the equivalent to, remember when Senator Inhofe brought the snowball onto the Senate floor to say, hey, climate change isn't happening. Look at this snowball.
Right. I can look out my window and see that it's cold, and now I know climate change is not happening.
So if you can conceptualize of trends statistical trends as it relates to climate change, you can conceptualize of trends as it relates to crime and maybe just try to get over some of your preconceived notions about certain kinds of people in order to get there and put that in the recycling bin.
DC, Las Vegas, and New Orleans, murder has declined by more than 30%. Now, again, this is 2024. It's early in the year, but we're just combining, January to April in these 2 years. In Chicago, murder has declined 12%. Asher concluded that the data, though incomplete, is encouraging overall. The murder decline of even half the magnitude suggested by the early 2024 data would place the U.S. murder rate this year largely on par or below where it was from 2015 to 2019. In other words, we're reverting to where we were pre-pandemic, which, to be clear, pre-pandemic was significantly lower when it comes to violent crime and murder than it was, again, 30 or 40 years ago from now, or from then even. So understand that just because we have handheld video cameras and social media, which means that you become more aware of these things than you would in eras where there was not video cameras or there was not social media, never mind the incentive for people to post these right now, which is higher with a Democratic administration in an election year. That's just the fact.
Yeah.
That does not mean, just because you can see it more, does not mean, on video, does not mean that there is actually more murder, more violent crime.
But Judd and the Popular Info folks end this piece by saying that the latest poll in Gallup in November found that 77% of Americans believe there's more crime in the U.S. than a year ago, right?
Well, part of it is, again, because we have
lagging indicators. I get it. Yeah.
But also video cameras. Like, I mean, there's a lot of data that suggests the more you see something,
yes,
even that you can create this fear. I mean, there's been a lot of academic work on this.
And we never hear that about social media, which is how like Instagram, TikTok, it's all about this sort of sensational crime footage.
Of course. And of course, there's incentive structures at different times, right? Like, I mean, look at the gas price reporting.
Yes.
When it's up versus when it's down. Look at, right now, things are pretty quiet at the border. Relatively speaking.
Yeah.
But you're not going to hear a lot of reporting about that. I mean, it's just the nature of both our media and an election year.
But and also honestly the Democrats, because they could make that point that you're making.
100%.
They could make these points, but like unfortunately liberals, it's like they don't really believe in dismantling like the police state or they just voted through that FISA crap, so they're very much okay with an expansive surveillance and police state, and crime statistics are beneficial for them. But the local, it's like when it bleeds, it leads, right? The local media is going to pick up on this stuff, and that contributes to the perception.
Yep. All right. One other thing I wanted to read before we get into a couple of these clips. There's a Time Magazine piece on Donald Trump. I haven't read through the entire thing. It's a little bit long. But this early paragraph, what emerged in 2 interviews with Trump and conversations with more than a dozen of his closest advisors and confidants were the outlines of an imperial presidency that would reshape America and its role in the world. To carry out a deportation operation designed to remove more than 11 million people from the country, Trump told me. He would be willing to build migrant detention camps and deploy the U.S. military both at the border and inland. He would let red states monitor women's pregnancies and prosecute those who violated abortion bans. He would, at his personal discretion, withhold funds appropriated by Congress, according to top advisors. He'd be willing to fire a U.S. attorney who doesn't carry out his order to prosecute someone, breaking with a tradition of independent law enforcement that dates from America's founding. Incidentally, there was a couple of times over the course of the Trump administration where he was stopped by the Supreme Court from doing some of the more egregious things. If you go back, you will see that there was basically 2 dynamics going on. One, you had a bunch of bumbling fools who worked for him, complete incompetence, who did not know how they had to follow government procedure to make these changes. And more often than not, a lot of these things were struck down because of that. You didn't do the 6-month waiting period. You didn't do the open comment period, blah, blah, blah. Also, recall that Supreme Court that shot down those things had about 2 less conservatives appointed by him. People forget Amy Coney Barrett put on that court 3 weeks before the election last time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different Supreme Court. a lot of the things that were breaks in the his first presidency are just not there this time. Both in terms of externally and breaks and in terms of like incompetence. They know how to do it this time.
The Project 2025 is exactly what you're talking about, the pre-vetting process
Without a doubt.
for the most loyal Trump people to get in there right away.
And just that there's just going to be a higher level of competence and it's going to be associated with that administration.
And
this time
urgency.
around. He is weighing pardons for every one of his supporters accused of attacking the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. More than 800 of whom have been pled guilty or convicted by a jury. He may not come to the aid of an attacked ally in Europe or Asia if he felt the country wasn't paying enough for its own defense. He would gut the U.S. civil service, deploy the National Guard to American cities as he sees fit, close the White House Pandemic Preparedness Office, that's it, without a doubt, and staff his administration with acolytes who back his false assertion that the 2020 election was stolen. Just important to keep in mind as we start to, the election now is about, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 6 months out. So.
Concerning.
A little bit concerning.
Yep.
Maybe we'll talk about the polling in a bit, but do you want to introduce these clips 8 and 9?
So, this interview was just a kind of masterclass in journalism by Norway Broadcasting Corporation's Yama Wola-Smal. Over the weekend, this interview was published in Norway. He speaks here with Israeli spokesperson David Menser. He's not an IDF spokesperson, but he is an Israeli spokesperson. And he questions him here, relentlessly, about Israel attacking hospitals in Gaza and claiming that they were Hamas command centers. And he just asks him why they haven't shown any proof. And this guy kind of has a temper tantrum.
Terrible crimes. 1 week into the war, your army spokesperson Daniel Hagari showed the world a virtual 3D model of an alleged Hamas command and control center, which stretched several stories beneath the largest medical facility in Gaza, the Shifa Hospital, which you know very well of. Why haven't you shown any proof of such a command center?
Again, Yama, this line of questioning really shocks us here in Israel because we've shown the world media, many journalists have been taken to those tunnels. We've seen those bulletproof doors. We've seen the cells, terror dungeon
specifically with
network.
Shifa Hospital, what you've shown the world are abandoned tunnels and shafts and weapons your forces claim were found inside the hospital. That does not prove that Hamas had a 3-story underground command and control center under the Shifa, a claim Israel has used to justify the attacks on hospitals all over the Gaza Strip.
I'm quite disappointed at this line of questioning, and it's not just from you, because we face this unreasonable burden of proof of the horrors of Hamas strategies. We've shown you tunnels.
Hamas has never denied they had tunnels under Gaza. That's an open secret. But you're claiming that they had a command center under the biggest hospital in Gaza. You use that as an argument to lay that hospital in ruins, and that's why it's a question the international press has to ask you. Where is this command center under the Shifa Hospital?
Asking questions is, of course, the right thing to do for any journalist, but we have produced evidence of terror tunnels underneath the hospital. I apologize, Yama, if it's not enough for you. I apologize for the fact that we found RPGs in an intensive care unit. I apologize for the fact that we were fired on from the maternity ward. And I can tell you one thing, it wasn't the midwives that were firing at us. Mm-hmm. The evidence is clearly there. Journalists have been taken there. There is a terror tunnel network, twice the size of the London Underground.
You've said it time and again, you find the line of questioning regarding the attacks on the hospitals and questioning these tunnels offensive.
I don't find it offensive. I find it ridiculous, to be
ridiculous.
You know,
Then
for an
why don't
intelligent
you-
person
why
like
don't
you,
you-
Yama,
but why
it's
don't you-
ridiculous.
why
What else
don't
do you
you
need to
then-
see? You've seen videos.
Listen, why
the
don't
Hamas
you-
admit it. We're fired from there. The terrorists are there. We kill 200 there. The doctors, we move the doctors and the patients out of the way. You know, I don't know. It's a ridiculous line of questioning. I'm not shocked by it. I find it ridiculous.
But why don't you open Gaza for international press who can freely move around and check these tunnels for themselves? Because what you've done until now in this war, you've sealed the borders. No journalists, independent journalists, are allowed in to Gaza by your forces and by Egypt. The journalists you're talking about who are allowed in are handpicked by the IDF. They go on so-called embeds, where the IDF forces decide where they go, where they move, where they film, and who they talk to. That's hardly the standard of free press.
So, Yama, we have taken in many, many journalists, critical
on
journalists, critical journalists as well. We have taken in many, many journalists on the
on
point.
guided tours,
Right.
Mr. Menser. That's different. That's not how free press should operate. We should have the ability, the possibility to move around freely, to check and verify things for ourselves. That's our job, especially in a war.
So
you're not allowing us to do our job.
Yama, you've put this accusation to me. Let me give you Israeli government response.
It's not an accusation, it's a fact. You do not allow independent
You've
journalists
put
access
these
to
points
the
to
Gaza
me.
Strip.
You've put these points to me. Allow me to reply. Number one, this is a war zone, an active war zone, not a normal war zone, not like in other countries in the past. This is perhaps...
Pause it 1 second. Just as you think about this, a couple of things. One, we know that the Israelis were aware of the tunnel system under the Al-Shifa hospital because they built it
Yes.
in the 80s. A. B, the idea that this guy's about to say, this is an active war zone. We want to protect journalists. They have killed, is it now 110 journalists in Gaza? Targeted.
Not to mention their families.
Targeted. And families. Targeted.
Well, yeah, I mean, they do get into that a little bit later if we want to go for longer, but when he says we move the doctors and patients out of the way, that is also a massive lie. First of all, he never addressed the 3D model at the beginning of the Hamas command center. There are tunnels, that was known, and that was all that was ever kind of displayed. There are bodies being uncovered in scrubs with their hands tied behind their backs in these mass graves, meaning it's clear that these doctors or hospital workers have been assassinated. So they're not being protected or moved out of the way. They were, in many instances in these mass graves, summarily executed. There is also testimony from medical workers in Gaza who say that if they are going to leave the hospital, they change out of their scrubs because they feel that having scrubs on means it's a target on their back by the IDF. So none of that stuff is true, and he's heavy breathing and uncomfortable because he has to address it.
Fight things for ourselves. That's our job, especially in a war. So you're not allowing us to do our job.
Yama, you've put this accusation to me. Let me give you Israeli government response.
It's not an accusation, it's a fact. You do not allow independent journalists access to the Gaza Strip.
You've put these points to me. Allow me to reply. Number one, this is a war zone, an active war zone, not a normal war zone, not like in other countries in the past. This is perhaps an unprecedented war zone in human history.
True.
Where
so is Ukraine and Russia,
where they
journalists
are fighting,
are allowed all the way
Hamas,
to the front
allow
line.
me to reply. You've asked me a question. Please do me the courtesy of allowing me to reply. So it's an active war zone. We have hostages in that in Gaza. We know there are still 133 of our people. Unfortunately, 36 of them have been killed. We know that our hostages are there as well. We fear for their presence as well. And we know that our armed forces would be jeopardized. They would be jeopardized. And we will always put the lives of our armed forces ahead of any sort of journalists wanting to go in.
Yeah. Yep. Later on, he talks about how when he's confronted about the IDF killing journalists, he says that they had to kill Al Jazeera chief's children because they were Hamas. When having to acknowledge the idea, they were adult children, I should say, his kids. But that was part of what he claims there, because he's confronted by the fact that, like, you're saying that you want to protect journalists and that's why you're not letting any journalists in. But you have killed over 100 journalists, and not just Palestinian journalists. We know early on a Reuters media worker and journalist was targeted. So I just found that to be like, as we play clips that we can kind of piece together that isn't being highlighted at all in the mainstream press here in the West, including like former hostage negotiators for Israel basically saying, Hamas has said they will release the hostages. It's Israel that's holding up these negotiations. And we're like, that is a refreshing display of actually not letting that guy off the hook. So great job.
Let's turn on the phones. 646-257-3920. 646-257-3920 is the number. Boy, we got a lot of stuff to get here too. Should we do the Pelosi and get that out of the way?
Oh my
gosh. Or is that going to be too upsetting?
If you'd like.
There needs to be someone better who can be sent out to do this stuff. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Is she being sent out or is she freelancing? Because I don't know. She could basically she's so many media contacts, she can do whatever she wants.
I guess. But, yeah, Kevin McCarthy goes on to the news occasionally. He's not doing them any favors, I think, the Republicans, which is why we play it and enjoy it.
Yeah. Right.
There's a reason why we play every time he goes on the news, because he's hurting Republicans.
And I'm sorry, the negative partisanship surrounding the name Kevin McCarthy is like peanuts in comparison to the negative partisanship surrounding Nancy Pelosi.
And say what you will for Nancy Pelosi's ability to legislate, or at the very least, control her caucus, which she was quite good at. She would never bring a bill on the floor that wasn't going to pass. Now, there was a lot of things that I think she also stopped from getting on there just from an ideological basis. Certainly, she was against Medicare for all and whatnot, and she wasn't alone. I mean, I would say probably half the Democratic caucus at a minimum is against it, or maybe about half. Nevertheless, she was never good at political messaging, and this is embarrassing. I hope that somebody close to her says, like, maybe this is a good time for us to say we're done going out and doing this. Here is Nancy Pelosi on with Katie Tur. And look, there's so many things that were bad about Donald Trump. Trying to be clever in making up stuff is stupid.
There's nothing in his performance, if that's the word we'll use, what he has done, that would indicate that he cares, prioritizes, or ever valued or did anything to support a democracy. And now on the ballot saying he should have immunity from whatever he might do. I mean, really, I have sympathy and respect for everybody who votes. I'm glad people vote. I know some of them will always reject those of us who might look different to them in leadership or the rest, and that's that. But there are those who have real legitimate concerns about immigration, globalization, innovation, and what does that mean for their job and their family's future? And we have to address those concerns. And Joe Biden is doing that, created 9 million jobs in his term in office. Donald Trump has the worst record of job loss of any president. So we just have to make sure people know.
That was a global pandemic.
He had the worst record of any president. We've had other concerns in our country. If you want to be an apologist for Donald Trump, that may be your role, but it ain't mine. And he has the worst.
I don't think that anybody can accuse me of that.
But let me just say, as the Speaker of the House, we put forth a $3 trillion bill $3 trillion of investment in communities and the rest, and that stimulates the economy.
I just want to ask one more question.
I mean, this idea that she has to respond in that way in probably the safest area in which she could go on MSNBC. It's just, it just destroys all credibility.
Exactly. Just say, basically, right. And yes, it was a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and you saw how Biden, when he took over during that moment of crisis, recovered from it. The economy immediately recovered. Donald Trump did not handle that pandemic well. He could have saved jobs. He could have made the American people a little bit more secure during this horrible time. This is off the top of my head, responding to this right
I mean,
there.
this is just sort of like a complete rookie stuff. And there are Democrats who just refuse to leave the stage. I mean, the president is one of them, obviously. But she doesn't need to go. Who is she speaking to?
It's amazing.
If she can't even, if she's gotten into an argument with the MSNBC host, who is she supposed to be convincing to vote for Joe Biden? I just don't understand. Is there nobody in the Democratic Party who's like, hey, we should probably have a concerted effort here? Is there nobody at the White House who could say, guys, I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, she's talking literally to the most insular audience possible with that. So the idea that she would get combative in a friendly environment. Earlier in that interview, she also was just chastising protesters for using the word genocide, Joe, which seems to be the only, she really had got her goat because she hears it outside her multi-million-dollar house in San Francisco, and how dare those protesters, obviously paid by Russia, obviously, disturb her in any way. It's really weird. As I was kind of alluding to earlier, she's not a popular politician outside of the Democratic Party at all. Among independents, Republicans, of course. But, she's basically reached her saturation point. This was part of the problem with Hillary Clinton in 2016, too, where it's everyone already made up their mind on this person. They've been in public life for way too long. Who are you? What is the value of her going out there at all to make any argument, even the bad ones that she's making right now?
I just let that be, please be the last Nancy Pelosi clip we ever have to play. That's all I say. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 513 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 513. Oh, wait. 513. Go ahead.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi, this is Henry from Cincinnati.
Henry from Cincinnati, what's on your mind?
Well, yesterday you talked a bit about the protests at OSU. I'm a student there, and if you like, I could talk just a little bit about it. I wasn't able to participate because I've been home since before I finished my exams before then, but I have a little bit of information.
Okay, so did you have friends at, and we should say, Ohio State University? Do you have friends who were there?
Yes, I have a couple of friends. One of my sister's friends was there, and basically, so you've covered all these protests. Really great job, honestly. It's just frustrating to see all the other media just focusing on all of the wrong things. Right, and specifically, what I can present and say about these protests is just all of the reasons that the administration has given for why they cracked down on it so hard, of not allowing encampments and distracting people during finals it's just, they're all excuses, and they clearly don't care about the actual facts of the matter. Right, the South Oval, for people who don't know what OSU's campus looks like, is not adjacent to almost any class buildings. It is next to 3 buildings that can have exams in them, and all the main entrances are on the other side of the building. This was an entirely peaceful protest the whole time, and ultimately, they weren't preventing anyone from entering areas that they needed to go to. So I just it's extremely frustrating as a person who I would have been there if I were still on campus, to see that the administration just doesn't care about any of those things and uses like these minor things. Like they don't allow you to put tents on the green. And like that is their reason for arresting tens of people for protesting a genocide.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is we're going to look for some photos, I think, of Ohio State, what the protests actually look like, but we have photos of the Columbia encampment, which is also being talked about as this massive, disruption to student life. This person, I think, who works on the campus here posted this what I sent in the chat.
This is some images of what the police did to students there. It is amazing. Like I've watched some of these images and it's so hard to imagine that like people are looking at this and like look at what's going on there and not come to the conclusion of these cops are rioting. They're the ones who are the violent ones. There's nobody throwing like Molotov cocktails or rocks, or they're doing like, you see these cops just tearing apart these tents and drag, 8 cops dragging one person down to the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nuts. It really is nuts.
Yeah, completely. And then you also yesterday had mentioned like the fact that there are snipers on campuses too.
Yeah.
Which is just, I mean, like that's not even, if you want to talk about just the police state being a bit wild, like that's not even an unusual thing at OSU's campus. Like every single football game, if you're walking into the stadium, there are snipers positioned like on the roofs of nearby buildings. And it's just, I personally, like, I think that that's a better police presence, right? They have less excuses of like, oh, I felt threatened by this person to like defend their own behavior when they're excessively violent. But it's just like this level of militarization. And I agree with you completely. I don't know how you can look at any of these instances and say, oh, these protesters who are sitting in their tents are the ones aggressing against the heavily armed riot police, instigating conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It definitely has a feeling of like we just want to show just make examples out of people. Because, I mean, the bottom line is you're on your exams. I would imagine the school wraps up in terms of like the semester ends in 3 or 4 weeks. People are going to start to disperse. They could leave people there. It really is just like some type of weird flex.
Yeah, exactly. And then just separate from that, I love your program. I've been listening since like 8 months ago or something like that. So unfortunately close to when all this started happening. But hey, I love your show. It's great. As somebody who, like in middle school, I listened to some stupid people like Tim Pool. Hey, you've really done a great job of helping me just have a much better understanding of the way the world actually works, and not listen like to just dumbasses.
Well, Henry, I appreciate the call, and don't beat yourself up too much. In middle school sounds about the age in which I think Tim Pool should appeal to you.
Yeah.
To the extent that he does.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Exactly. Well, I feel that way just about, I'm 20 years old, I'm still in college, and I just every right-wing talking point I see, it feels like the demographic they're appealing to is people, at least with the mental capacity of me in middle school.
Well, Bugattis are cool, so appreciate the call.
That's very true.
Thanks,
you.
Henry.
Keep it up. Those kids are, I mean, it's awesome to see how this is spreading like this.
Yep.
And you see some of the videos of kids in Gaza basically saying thank you, and Bizan, who I know is big reporter from Gaza, on Instagram and on other social media platforms, saying, this is the first time I felt hope and envisioned the idea that I could rebuild my home. So it really does make a massive difference, just like for people to see on the outside that Americans don't support this.
And the spreading is wild. It's gone from Ivy League, so you had all the commentators being like, what are these Ivy League kids? And then all of a sudden it's
Nate
at public
Silver.
universities.
Right.
And now it's not even just American universities. You're seeing it across the world.
Right. Now it has to go from like, these are spoiled Ivy Leaguers to college kids are stupid.
Yep. they don't know what they're talking about. That was what Bill Maher's monologue was just all about. Was about how stupid these kids are.
There's nobody in a bigger bubble than Bill Maher.
Oh yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing because
when are you getting your home studio?
What's incredible?
Right
what's
now.
incredible is that the students are actually so educated, and like they keep trying to say that they're just ignorant when you're the ignorant one. Tell me what the Nakba was. I know.
Tell me what happened in Colombia in 1968.
I'm gonna interrupt my guest.
No rule.
Never forget John Barnett. I know a John Barnett. Is it the same one?
Sounds like a Trump alter ego that he calls in.
That was John Miller.
John Miller, yes.
I've noticed Don Lemon, surprisingly, has been having a bunch of independent, center, left, and even lefty journalists and political commentators on his new show. That's not terribly surprising to me. Like Cenk, Pacman, Mehdi Hassan. The episode with Mehdi is especially good as it's about the horrors in Gaza, and Mehdi calls Lemon naive for believing Elon Musk. Have either of you been invited on the show? No. I have not. No. I got invited on, what was the...
Zero Hedge?
No. Oh, yeah. Did we get... Yeah, maybe. But Piers Morgan. But they shoot during our show.
Oh.
So I would rather do our show than Piers Morgan. Jimmy Bobby Francis Ray Jr. Why am I the only person in the room that remembers college kids are morons? I don't know if that was a joke or if you were just, or if you actually believe that. Did you say my name? Definitely not Trump here. Oh, John Miller. Worcester Don Draper, as I famously said, Bugatti Ferrari, the Benz, the Bentley, juicy stays stunting. I don't know what that means. Emma's distant cousin, when Kristi Noem's daughter asked where Cricket was after Noem had killed the dog and a goat, I'm surprised she didn't say, keep asking questions and you'll find out.
Still think that's some sort of satanic ritual.
It's hilarious how much this has created like some type of like, concern in the right-wing music. Maybe we'll play that guy later, but I don't feel like doing
Well, it's because the right has their own sort of urban-rural divide too that they don't know how to navigate.
Calling from a 951 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
It is you.
Excellent. Well, I was just calling. I have a friend that's in Gaza. I've been in contact with him for, almost since October 7th started. And I'm trying to help him raise funds. He's got a family of 14 he's trying to get out. Right now they're holed up in Deir al-Bala. So we had to lower the fundraising amount because the initial 100K was very intimidating. And unfortunately, Egypt is just requiring these absurd fees in order to get them out of Rafah and into Egypt. But anyway, so his name is Mohammed Nasrallah. Just to give you a little bit of backstory, he was an IT student, and he was trying to get to, I think there's a university in Syria or something he's trying to get to basically move his family out. And then October 7th happened. They lost their home almost, I think, within a week or so. His father had spent about 30 years building up this beautiful home as a 2-story, decked out, very nice place. I know a lot of people see footage now and it looks like just poverty-stricken area. But before that, I'm sure it was just a beautiful place, even despite the Israeli occupation and blockade. So, like, in a second, basically, like, bombs dropped. Thankfully, they're all okay. His father lost his mechanic job. He was the one supporting them. And I was asking him when the last time he actually had any kind of aid was. And it's been about 4 months now since any aid has even been able to access the north of Gaza. And you know, the when Biden made his phone call to Netanyahu was a couple of months ago, and he gave him that stern talking to. I think even wagged his finger at Netanyahu a couple of times. And they pulled out some of the soldiers, but what happened was some of the soldiers left the area, but then the drone raids or the drone attacks increased.
Yeah.
And, you know, every time I am able to get him onto the phone, and he wanted to call, I was trying to get him to call in and talk to you personally, but reception out there is so bad that it was impossible. So here I am speaking on his behalf. And
yeah, do you want to give us, is there a GoFundMe or something?
Yes, there's a GoFundMe. His name is Mohammed Nasrallah, Mohamad Nasrallah, Nasrallah. And if you just go into the GoFundMe, you will see the link there. We've gotten enough money to send one person out.
Organized by Sarah?
Yes.
Okay, we have that link, Bradley.
And so, and I know there's information there. There's also, you know, there's PayPal donations, but right now we're trying to fund the GoFundMe page. You know, the thing is, like, they have 3 children, and they're all, I think they have, I don't want to say what I think they have, but they're all sick. Like, they're drinking contaminated water, and every day, Muhammad is basically out looking for, you know, wood to burn for cooking, looking for food scraps and clean potable water to help them, you know, survive, basically. And it's really bad. I know you know this, but it's just, I'm so worried about him. I've been talking to him, you know, almost every day. And the thing about this guy, and I think this is really important, he never once asks for any help. He's so humble. All he just wants to know how I am. He wants to reassure me because I'm worried about him. And like just the humbleness of that, it just breaks my heart. Like, how is it that he's reassuring me to be okay when he's the one in a war zone? It's just unbelievable. So that's about it. Thank you for taking my call and boosting this signal. It's very important. And you guys are doing excellent work, and you guys are responsible for getting the need to understand more of the situation so I can bring more information to the people in my circle that are more ignorant or more supportive of Israel than maybe they should be. So that's it. I'll let you move on. But thank you very much. Left is best.
Okay, thanks. What's your name? And where you just?
My name is.
Where you were calling from?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Dan, originally from Southern California.
Okay. All right. And all right, we appreciate the call, Dan. And let me just say, we'll put a link to it. But we just you know, I have to do the caveat. Like, you know, we've done this in the past, but I had firsthand you know, a way of validating the GoFundMe, and I don't have that here. Right. So just say that with, you know, I mean, I'm looking at it, and you know, it appears to look you know, legit from my perspective. So we'll put a link there, but I want to, you know, make it. I have to say, make it clear, like, I don't have the awareness of who you are, what this fundraiser is in terms of the way that I did in the last one we did.
I could possibly get you in touch with the organizer herself. I know her very well too. I know the hoops she's had to jump through to make sure that everything is legit. And I know the State Department, I think, is the one that handles the funds for overseas. They've vetted her time and again. They've sent form after form, and you know, it's as legit as you can get. But if you'd like, I can send you her information, and you can verify with her.
That never hurts. That never hurts. But like I say, we're going to put a link to it right now, and we've got the image of it up on the screen, right? We'll put that up on the screen.
I'll post this on
And
my
we'll put a link.
personal on my Instagram to get that out there as well. So
I appreciate that, and I'll go ahead and I'll send you an email with her information so you can do some extra vetting on your end.
Great.
And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, bye-bye.
Let's go to 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. It's Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. Long time no hear from, Josh.
Well, I'm busy educating the minds of America, the young minds of America.
Well, I'm glad to hear that at least.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I want to talk about my experience of being a young Jewish person in America for a second and sort of assumptions of beliefs that one might have. That's okay with you?
Sure. Yes, of course.
So yeah, I'm going to give my friend a shout out here because this is a discussion I had with my friend who is a Majority Report listener, Carrie.
Carrie.
All right. But yeah, so he and I were talking and texting, and again, this idea that as a Jewish person, I have to have some sort of like preset belief, right? Or pre-found belief, or I have to be supportive of one side or the other, this side or that side, right? And so, he and I are talking, and I'm texting him, and he texts me back, basically implying, I think, well, I'll read the text. He says, Josh, you care more about winding me up in your own family. You're a Chicago Jew like me. Drop the Arsenal crap. As if to say that just because I'm Jewish, I'm supposed to support the Tottenham Hotspur's soccer club. Basically saying I'm a self-hating Jew, right? Pretty much.
Yeah.
So, and I know Carrie's listening because he's like a loyal listener. So I just want to reply to Carrie and address him if that's okay. And I'm sorry in advance of this. It was like more niche topic.
No, but I really, Josh, admire the passive aggression of doing it on this show as opposed to just responding to his text.
Oh, I have, but I think it's really important that a large audience
weighs in.
hears this, right?
Yes, no,
So,
I agree.
Yeah. So look, just because Tottenham Hotspur play in the Jewish area of London, right, does not mean, and as a Jewish person, does not mean I have to support Tottenham Hotspur. That does not predisperse me from birth supporting Tottenham Hotspur. Sometimes you grow up with certain values, right? And some values that I grew up with, which maybe are sort of non-negotiable to me, are simply wanting to watch a good football team win trophies, play good football, deal with set pieces, and put in maximum effort. And so I don't think I'm a self-hating Jew just because I'm an Arsenal supporter, So I just wanted to throw that out to Kerry. Hope he listens. Maybe he can respond. But as a Jewish person, I owe Tottenham Hotspur none of my allegiance. And yes, I did enjoy our win in the North London Derby.
All right. Well, I appreciate the call, Josh. And let me just say to Carrie, is it Carrie?
Carrie.
Yeah, number 646-257-3920. And there's,
And if you want to respond to Josh, you can call into this show, and then he can call in again and respond to you in that way. That can be a whole anthology series.
There's a lot of people in the IMs who are really responding well to this, Josh, and that is disturbing to me. But I appreciate the call.
Oh, well, no, my pleasure. I'm going to get back to educating the youth of America.
Yes, please do.
Tomorrow.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. I don't know why you're out so early today. Maybe it's still vacation, actually. Speaking of which, as a Jew, I found this particularly offensive. Let's play this student from, she was on, what show was it on?
Abby Phillip.
Abby Phillip on CNN.
The horrible Abby Phillip.
And this is, I just, it's all well and good. There's no reason why you wouldn't bring different students onto your show, I guess. This idea, and again, I've said this many times, there is an increase in anti-Semitism in this country and probably globally, frankly. And it is definitely attributable to what Israel is doing in Gaza. And that doesn't justify it in any way, but it certainly gives, it provides more oxygen. There's always been anti-Semitism here. But there is a cohort of Jews in this country who have centered themselves as the victims. And we live in America, and I understand if you're concerned, you have family in Israel and whatnot, and October 7th was horrible, and certainly people in Israel are afraid. But if you're a reporter and you have somebody on there, there's some basic facts that you should not allow this person to lie about. Let's play this clip.
Well, why have this person on?
Well, I mean, I certainly, after the fact, but, you bring on, I would hope that they have brought on protesters
Jewish Voice
as well.
for Peace demonstrators. How about that?
I would hope that they would have done that, but.
So you describe yourself as Black, Native American, and Jewish. You've talked about how your feelings of feeling accepted on the campus changed after October 7th. What has that been like?
It's been really difficult. Again, I went through a lot of this grief process and primarily experiencing this issue in the first semester. That's when I learned that the community that I felt previously so accepted by, specifically because of my identities, all of this was actually conditional, and the one condition is my Jewish identity, which I assumed.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, here's the thing, and we should say, she spoke at that support the genocide rally with the Robert Hagee. John Hagee,
who said Hitler was.
Without knowing this person or what she's dealing with at school, I do spend a decent amount of time talking to college students, and the idea that this person was singled out because she's Jewish is an absolute lie.
Yeah.
The reason why she is fine, it has nothing to do with her identity. It has to do with what she believes is okay.
Her political, not religious.
Exactly. And she is going to go on and tell a big, big lie, a very easily checkable lie in a moment to justify her entire premise here. Go ahead.
One condition is my Jewish identity, which I assumed was also another reason why I was so uplifted, because the Jewish people are a significant minority.
One of the things that your classmates will say is that they are protesting Zionism, which is specifically this movement to create, to develop, to support a Jewish state. Is it legitimate in your view to protest Zionism specifically?
Absolutely not. And there are many different ways you can look at this. But number one is that Zionism makes the Jewish people, 80% of them identify as Zionists, potentially more. I would have to check the statistics, but I know it is.
Pause it. You know what? Let's check the statistics, because that is an unequivocal lie that when you're on a news program, you can actually check. Now, this is back in 2021, May of 2021. A far less controversial time for a Jew to identify as a Zionist. This is Pew Research. They're a fairly reputable outfit. Let's scroll down a little bit here. Okay. Israel, the world's only Jewish majority country, is subject to special concern by Jews in the United States. Caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to. Now, if 80 some odd percent are Zionists, you would imagine it would be pretty high, this figure, right? Like it would be about 80%.
Yeah.
It turns out that it's only, it's not essential to what being Jewish means to more than 45% of Jewish adults. 37% say it's important, but not essential. That doesn't make them Zionists. There is no assessing like whether the people perceive themselves as Zionists. And I got news for you. That number is much lower today.
Oh yeah, and
much lower.
Even in 2011, there was a Pew poll that we talked about last week that twice as many white evangelical Protestants as Jews say that Israel was given to the Jewish people by God, and that's 82% versus 40%. So it gives people a sense of like, what are some of the other political forces driving this, and why this student might be on stage with someone like John Hagee, who said Hitler was sent by God to create Israel.
Kufi is a much bigger organization, but the point is that why I resent it is that she's out there basically saying I'm not Jewish because I don't subscribe to Zionism or Israel's policies. And it's a lie. It's a lie that if it had been used in the other way, if someone was accused of operating because they're Jewish in Israel's interests, simply because they're Jewish, you might get censured in Congress for people even misinterpreting what you said about that. Yes, it's just unbelievable that she can go on there and say this without any type of pushback. It's offensive to me as a Jew. In addition to it being just offensive from a perspective of just like what the reality is.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that the percentages of Jews who are represented in these protests, both as a percentage of like Jews in the specific populations of these different universities, and just in terms of raw numbers, is probably significantly higher than any other, on a per capita basis, than any other identification whatsoever.
That's what the demonstrators are saying, in part because they're trying to get the word out that their religious identity and cultural identity is being weaponized by people who don't have their best interests at heart to further a genocide, and yet there's blackout on the media front on that. Why not bring on a Jewish Voice for Peace person to explain that? That might be interesting to your audience, right? If they already feel that that Zionism equals Judaism, perhaps this could be a new angle. But then they bring on someone to reinforce that. I mean, let's be clear about what their bias is. Even though the polling about what Israel is doing is just like plummeting, mass disapproval.
I mean, 75% of Democrats now, and we know that Jews are one of the most consistent Democratic voting blocs in the country.
Yeah. How does MAGA feel about Israel?
It's just unbelievable. Yeah, bring on somebody from Kufi. If you want to talk about who the supporters are, bring on a couple of Christian Zionists, and let's hear about their support of Israel. All right. We got a lot of clips we did not get to.
No, that's true. I mean, we could, for something a little fun, Seinfeld. That's what we wanted to get to.
Okay,
right,
let's
Sam?
do the Seinfeld. But I also want to get to that PDB thing. But we'll get to. We've been talking about Jerry Seinfeld and what a tool he is.
Since before I worked here.
For probably a decade.
It's kind of an open secret, right? That he's a bit of an a-hole.
Well, I'm not, I don't care what he is in person, although, yeah, that's true. But really, more relevantly, I also love too, the how Israel supporter is, I got offered a role on Seinfeld, but they were shooting on Yom Kippur. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. And I remember I ran into the casting director. She was in a car. I was in a car. I was leaving like some studio, and she pulls up and she's like, "Why aren't you doing this?" And no, it was a guy actually. And he's like, "Why aren't you doing this?" I'm like, I think his name was Mark. Mark, it's Yom Kippur. I happen to know a lot of these people on the show are Jewish. Like, I'm not doing it. It's Yom Kippur. I don't work on Yom Kippur. But put that aside. That's not relevant here. But what Jerry Seinfeld is about to say is such a crock of garbage. It's unbelievable. I I couldn't believe this. I saw that he was trending. I'm like, why? Here
Well,
it is.
it's not because his wife donated the most amount to the UCLA protesters, pro-Israel protesters that said the N-word at pro-Palestine demonstrators. It's not that. It's this part about him.
Nothing really affects comedy. People always need it. They need it so badly, and they don't get it. It used to be you would go home at the end of the day. Most people would go, oh, Cheers is on. Oh, MASH is on. Oh, Mary Tyler Moore is on. All in the Family's on. You just expected there'll be some funny stuff we can watch on TV tonight. Well, guess what? Where is it? This is the result of the extreme left.
Okay,
and
pause it. Now, I don't know how they cut this up. But the idea that they're, and we should say, those 5 or 6 shows, he just basically listed all of the sitcoms on at that time. All of them. The idea that there's less number of funny shows. And yes, on network television, I would say the comedy was better back in the day. And the reason is because there were no other options. The competition wasn't as stiff. The industry was still very young. The number of people who had televisions was less. Much of them were highly educated, so you could have highly educated people who were coming from diverse backgrounds go in and write. Now it's just a pipeline from Harvard onto these sitcoms. But the idea that he's comparing, understand, the sitcoms he's talking about were on in the 70s, which was, incidentally, a very woke time coming out of the 60s. In the early 70s, a very woke time.
All in the Family was considered that right at the time, like actually discussing race on TV.
But this is what this old man, and I'm speaking as an old man, this is what this old man doesn't understand. When he starts mentioning these shows, he's talking about television programs that were on 50 years ago. 50 years ago. I don't know what he think has happened in between those period of time in terms of comedy.
Well,
but go ahead.
Guess what? Where is it? This is the result of the extreme left and PC crap and people worrying so much about offending other people. When you write a script and it goes into 4 or 5 different hands, committees, groups, here's our thought about this joke. Well, that's the end of your comedy.
Okay,
They
pause
move
it.
the game.
This is fascinating to me because I have written at least maybe 10 scripts for network television. ABC, NBC, CBS, HBO, AMC, Fox. I mean, just about all of the networks at one time or another. And there was never a single time that I did this where you did not hand it over to 4 or 5 people who are executives at the network who would give you notes, and only one or two of those shows even got produced. And it makes me really wonder how involved he was in the writing process. Now, I don't know. I will say this too. I do know for a fact that the Seinfeld show was part of, at an era when comedians were getting holding deals. I got a couple of those holding deals. They were massive, massive. They don't do anything like this anymore for like basically no names or even, like whatever it is. And not even close. But I made tons of money, huge money on holding deals. And he had a holding deal. This is what I remember about how Seinfeld was developed. And they did the show because they wanted to have him around for maybe to fill in on the Tonight Show, I think it was. Because they were going through all this stuff with Carson and with Leno, and they wanted to have him under wraps. And so this show, Seinfeld, was basically a way to keep him in the fold. And they put it up, and it was underperforming and this and that, but they just didn't worry about it. So maybe Seinfeld did not get the normal amount of scrutiny that most sitcoms got then and since. I mean, I in the early 90s, mid 90s, I did sitcoms. I saw what happened with those things. They would give it to the network and we would have to change stuff. They'd give it to the studio. We'd have to change stuff. What he's talking about is complete fiction.
Yeah.
The idea that these committees have been set up for PC purposes. Now, he may think that the people who look at these things, the executives and the audience, has become more PC, which means their tastes have changed.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like, this is just the redo of him complaining about his gay king joke that wasn't funny to people anymore. But I got news for you. Go watch some of the best comedians in the world and go and tell me whether those jokes are relevant anymore.
Yeah.
They're not. Comedy has very little staying power.
Sam, in the 80s, were there comedians or performers upset because they couldn't jump Jim Crow anymore?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can't do my step and fetch it anymore. People don't seem it funny. And it's like, oh, you shouldn't do that anymore.
Man.
I mean, maybe he could tune into the show that he was just on, Curb Your Enthusiasm, to see what his writing partner, who got a blank check from HBO to do much funnier stuff than he'd been doing. I'm sorry, I haven't seen the B movie, since Seinfeld went off the air, or his other colleague and coworker, Julia Louis-Dreyfus,
on Veep.
who Veep did not hold back in some of the kind of offensive jokes, or It's Always Sunny, or 30 Rock, or any of these other awesome shows that have come out since then. But if he wants a more current perspective, he could always just go to the local high school and pick up a girl there again and maybe ask her opinion.
I mean, all that stuff, honestly, is largely irrelevant in my mind. I think it's probably more a function of like, he's just
relevant to him.
Mad. He's just mad that he's irrelevant.
Yeah.
That nobody, that's what this is about. And he's making shit up. It's just comedy was never particularly interesting. It wasn't. Was the show good? It was okay. Even if you think it was great, go listen to some of his stand-up. Why don't you want to hear more about airline food?
Yeah, the edgy stuff
It's
came
boring.
from Larry.
It's
It was Larry. It was Larry.
There wasn't a lot of
It's
competition.
boring.
It was Larry.
Seinfeld's stand-up was boring. Boring. Go ahead.
Groups, here's our thought about this joke. Well, that's the end of your comedy. They move the gates, like in skiing. Yeah. Culture, the gates are moving. Your job is to be agile and clever enough that wherever they put the gates, I'm going to make the gate. Nothing really.
Like, I don't like. This is the thing that he doesn't understand. Culture is moving, and guess what, dude? You know, you left your skis in the lodge.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Sorry, your Rolls is getting stopped at the gate.
It's unbelievable. It really is amazing to me. And what's really amazing to me is that, like, and I guess they got to do this because he probably has such a fragile ego. But and Remnick's there, and he's a bright guy, but like, somebody push back on the absolute lunacy and ridiculousness of this whiny guy. Just take your millions. If you can't do a show that people like you say, like Larry David has, or like
Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Julia Louis-Dreyfus. If you can't seem to write one that people like, then just wrap it up, buddy, and go home. Stop complaining. Stop complaining.
He really has no reason to. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, ego's pretty big.
Imagine you had an infinite budget and you still couldn't be funny anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Hell on earth.
right.
Exactly. And he says, it doesn't affect me or Larry David anymore. Well, then how come, where's your show? Yeah.
And Larry seems a lot less bitter than you, buddy.
Eddie Munster. I saw Seinfeld stand up a few years ago and was surprised by how recycled his jokes were. I knew the punchline to half his material. Yeah, it's not surprising at all. Folks, that's all the time we have for our call-in portion of our program. Let's read a couple of these IMs. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Jerry's right. People weren't ready for Michael Richards' stand-up. That was like, what, 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, the apology that he did was also very funny.
JR in Philly. Sam, do you have any familiarity with Alan Lichtman's work? He was a determinative model to forecast the presidential election. I feel like I remember that guy's name, but I'm not sure. There was an article in The Hill. I will look that up. I don't know how much these models work in this context, but we'll see. Rampaging toaster, violent arrest of peaceful pro-Palestine protesters last night at the VCU campus in Richmond, Virginia. 502 Drew, I'm sure that 11K fine will really stop him from violating that gag order again. The dude owes $500 million between the fraud case and the rape case, and he still won't stop running his dumb mouth. The statutorily, you can't impose more of a fine than $11,000 on that gag order, or he goes to jail.
Right.
And they won't put him in a jail. Ostentatious. MASH was anti-war and far left. The butt of every joke was a ferret-faced John Birch Society. Get us out of the Union, philandering American patriot, and Frank Burns. All in the Family. The Jeffersons.
Sanford and Son.
Sanford and Son. Well, All in the Family and Jeffersons in particular.
Like the Norman Lear.
Were Norman Lear shows. They were extremely far left for that era. Extremely. And at that time, the setup, at least, very much for All in the Family, was look how anachronistic Carol O'Connor's, Archie Bunker is. But we got to put a couple of people in there to complain about him. Meathead and Archie's daughter. I can't remember her character's name. Sally Struthers. I mean, and that was 60 years ago. The idea that there would be no progress and like we wouldn't get past that as a satire, we're still going to recycle that. When he watches it, he doesn't get it because it used to be that TV was literally all about guys like he and I. And now when he turns it on, he's like, what is this? I don't get this. That's his problem. God, Jesus, I find it so enraging. And back when I was like doing comedy, like when we were at doing cross comedy, I mean, we couldn't have been more disdainful of how boring Jerry Seinfeld was. At a time like where it was just like had nothing to do with anything other than like, God, man, fucking wants to deal with that.
Right.
God. Gloria, thank you, was the name of Meathead's girlfriend, or Archie Bunker's daughter. Johnny Blaze. If you guys think Noam's puppy killing story was wild, you haven't heard anything yet. In the latest episode of Chapo, they were talking about another part from her book where Noam recalls a prank her dad pulled on one of his disabled employees.
Oh my God.
What was the prank? Her father fed the employee his own pet cat because he took a day off.
No, that can't be real.
They
That
told
can't
the
be
employee
real.
it was a squirrel, and I guess that was part of the prank.
Does Chapo have access to the full
no
book?
Way, no way.
Yeah,
That
no
can't
way.
be. I'm sorry. I don't buy that. Deep State Chihuahua. I love 5-4. So glad you're having Peter on. Living Coder. Would Trump be immune from taking over private land for federal projects that his company has granted the rights to via eminent domain? I don't know. Mike from Texas. I, for one, am surprised by the Gen Z. I thought us millennials were good at getting on the right side of issues, but wow, I'm just amazed by today's kids. Kudos to them. Sam, I beg you to take a day off and go on Pierre's show. I can't justify that. Well, maybe. Henry, I'm an OSU student. Oh, good. We already spoke to you. All right, 5 more. Big Mountain. These people cry about cancel culture so much, but they lick their chops at the first opportunity to give it the other way.
But again, there's no actual contradiction here. The cancel culture was that they were upset that Charles Murray wasn't able to go on campus and be lauded for saying black people have smaller brains. Like, that's always what this has been.
Kowalski, sustaining member from Nebraska. Howdy, Majority Report. Emma, certainly nice of you to let Sam Seder co-host with you for a bit. Them Hollywood types are a bit different. Sam, have you been following the news in Massachusetts about the National Guard personnel and resources being utilized to help house migrants in the state? Seems like a much better model to use the National Guard for, as opposed to like going to Eagle Pass and killing people or potentially sending them onto college campuses again to kill people. I prefer National Guard being used to fight wildfires and help those in need. Anyways, you guys should look into it, maybe get someone to talk about it. Seems like it's been going under the national radar that Massachusetts is using its resources far more responsibly to help migrants. Left is a sustaining member. It's a good idea. Let's look into that. 4 more. Glass-Steagall. The people totally ignoring Gaza and still going on about Trump and democracy maybe aren't the worst actors, but they are some real clowns. That caller called it a program. Checks out as an MR fan. Also, you should really do Piers Morgan. 2 more. WTF Cody. She also wrote about killing her mean goat by shooting it in the head, but she missed the kill shot and had to shoot it again.
Yeah, that one's verified.
And so the blood sacrifice did not take.
I mean, goats are usually pretty nasty as they are, right?
Yeah, this goat wasn't behaving itself.
I hope she ate it at least. And how many more do we have? 2 more? BB Teach. My father didn't realize All in the Family was satirizing Archie Bunker.
Mm.
Yes. A lot of that happened with Stephen Colbert, too.
Right.
Which was pretty left-wing. And the final IM of the day, Omega. Jerry Seinfeld is a crybaby who did nothing to beat certain allegations. He got very lucky. Meanwhile, other shows were relegated due to racism, among other things. He wasn't as funny as George Carlin, the Murphys, Charlie and Eddie, Jamie Foxx, Steve Harvey, Bernie Mac, and others from his generation.
Jamie Foxx is so funny.
People made him. That is 100% true.
Watch the first 5 episodes of Jamie Foxx show, and you see him dance, sing, do so much performing that Seinfeld couldn't remotely do as a comedic performer.
Have you heard his Trump impression?
Seinfeld's?
No, Jamie Foxx's Trump impression is one of the best out there.
All of his impressions are good.
He's also,
Yeah.
I mean, king.
Jamie King? It's his name in that show.
Oh. I remember.
Matt, Bradley, Emma, great job today. Folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know